Sonic Movieverse Book 1, Be Alright Chapter 1. Carnivy was right all along. That Blue Devil sure was a fast one. He was still reeling from seeing it in action, however. He was more satisfied with the fact that no one had believed him until the epic battle that had taken place a few days ago. He was currently sitting at a bar stool, his drawing proudly hung on the wall. By now, a few more drawings had joined his as soon as the battle had occurred. Parents had returned to their houses to tell their children the fantastic tale of the Blue Devil. Of course, all of them had been eager to share the love and support for their town hero.
Well, Carl, looks like you weren't so crazy after all. Never will believe it.
One man stated with a smirk. Another patted him on the back.
For whether you had us worried, old man never doubted you for a moment, obviously, but you gotta admit, was a crazy story.
They don't call me Crazy Carl for nothing, and I told you, Lel.
Carl threw in between laughter.
Yeah. As much as I'd like to hear all about it, I still got some damage control to do in here. Come on, get Lemon. Out you go, and I'll expect you boys back tomorrow.
The bartender cut in amused.
Right on, lady.
Carl exclaimed, getting up from his seat.
I'll be here as always, see ya.
As he walked home, he thought about his traps. The little creature had messed with them before his electrifying showdown in town, but there was no use replacing them now. He would just have to clean the area up and make sure it's trap-free for the Blue Devil to run around if he pleased. He was almost home when a loud metallic snap and the following bellowing shriek quickly caught his attention.
Darn it.
Carl ran toward the sound, hoping he had been too late. However, the shaking orange mass of dirty fur and the chilled like wells told him he indeed was.
Oh no.
The house was repaired for the most part. Robotnik was gone for good. Sonic was staying with them, and Rachel wasn't telling Maddie to divorce him. For now, all in all, Tom was enjoying the peace and quiet he'd had for the last few days. Well, as quiet as it could be with Sonic around. And then his phone rang.
Nowski.
Sheriff, oh thank goodness you picked up. I called your buddy at the station and he didn't believe a word I said. Would you believe that? I mean, seriously.
Tom rolled his eyes.
I'll talk to Wayne, Carl. What's the matter?
I think I caught someone in my traps. I was gonna take them down. I swear I...
Why we held up someone and...
Yes, and I panicked and now the thing doesn't want me near it.
Carl yelled.
I'll be right there.
Tom was already out the door and about to hang up the phone when Carl's yelling brought his focus back in the call.
What?
Bring the Blue Devil.
Miles was in awe of the forest. The forest on Mobius had gone dry while his world suffered, and he had seen such lush trees in a long time. He had had the chance to while in hiding. The fox had picked up traces of Sonic in a small cave. He could tell that the hedgehog had spent significant time in there, but the place looked vacant once more. He sincerely hoped he wasn't too late, even when the signal only seemed to get stronger with his search. While the matter was pressing to him, he wanted to bathe in the beautiful nature that surrounded him. He felt guilty. Longclaw had sacrificed herself for him to escape when the Exodus found out about his plan, and while he made sure they did have rings to follow him, his caretaker was still in great danger. His world was in great danger, and neither he or Longclaw had gotten to enjoy such beauty in many years. Now, he wasn't sure she would ever get to that point again. Miles shook his head.
Focus, you gotta find Sonic. Lemclaw is counting on you.
He thought. After a few minutes of walking, Miles reached a clearing. He gulped. He didn't want to be seen by anyone. Flying was too great a risk, even if it was faster than walking, which could also get him spotted in a heartbeat. Thankfully, he was small. He could probably crawl through the tall grass and escape anyone who lived nearby. He spotted another opening to the forest slightly to his right, and he made it his destination. With that plan in mind, the fox angled himself toward the opening and began to crawl on all fours, his tail smoothly brushing the ground behind him as he kept them low. His large ears picked up on small insects such as crickets and flies, but no sign of anybody nearby. He almost made it to the opening when he heard a sharp click and felt excruciating pain on his left tail. His shriek pierced the air. Through ragged breath and teary vision, he frantically located the source of his pain, a trap. His tail was caught in a metallic jaw. A sob escaped his lips against his wool.
No, no, no.
He softly wailed, his whole body shaking from the anxiety that began to consume him. Not only was he trapped and hurt, but he had surely alerted someone of his whereabouts. He was doomed. His ears picked up on footsteps, which seemed to rush to his destination. He struggled against the trap, his heart pounding in his chest, but his escape attempts were futile as any movement sent waves of pain shooting through him. His last resort at protecting himself from the threat was to curl up in a ball and wrap his injured tail around him. A branch snapped to his left. The threat had arrived.
Oh no.
Miles remained immobile, his body shaking. He willed it to stop while he also tried to conceal his sobs.
Darn it, what do I do?
The fox heard, but he didn't dare take a peek. He heard shuffling.
Aha, little fella, come down, will ya? Let me get you out of there.
He felt a hand on his back. His whole body jolted as if shot, which pulled at his tail. He shrieked again.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to help.
The voice exclaimed. Miles shook his head and shifted his body away from the threat as far as his injured tail allowed him to.
No, no, please go, please.
He begged, pressing his ears against his head and using his right tail to shield himself. The threat was silent for a moment, and then the fox heard his footsteps getting progressively quieter. He finally peeked and noted to himself that the threat, an adult male, he assumed at first glance, stood an extra few feet away, his back facing him. He seemed to hold a device similar to his own scanner to his ear, but he also seemed to converse with someone else. Miles couldn't focus enough to hear the exchange by word. It dawned on him that the male could be calling for someone to pick him up, and his heartbeat sped up once more. He was going to get taken away and he couldn't do anything to escape. He choked on yet another sob and hid behind his injured tail. He willed himself to calm down. This wasn't the first time he had been in trouble, and surely he could find a way out of this. Yet this was different. He was in a whole new world with different technology, different species, and he had no place to hide lest he got lost. He stayed still, trying to avoid bringing more attention to himself if he were to make a move, until more footsteps came his way. Those seemed heavier and more purposeful, and he whimpered. He really was going to get taken. And then he heard them, the fastest and lightest footsteps he'd ever heard before. Could it be?
Hey, kid.
Miles jumped. He didn't expect the voice to be so close to him, yet it sounded youthful and friendly.
Can you please look at me? I'm here to help, I promise. I'll get you out of there.
It took all of Miles' willpower not to look, and yet he was drawn to the voice. Still shaking, although calmer than he was a few moments ago, he looked up. He was met with a pair of electric green eyes and cobalt blue quills. The hedgehog smiled.
It's okay, kid. Deep breaths and you will be free in no time.
The fox slowly nodded. It would be okay, now that he'd found Sonic, but he had so many questions in mind. Before he could ask one, however, the second male, who had just got into them, took a step forward. Miles whimpered and curled in further on himself. Sonic immediately took notice and stood in front of the fox, blocking him from sight.
Wait, Tom, step back.
We have to get him out of that trap, Sonic.
Tom sighed, exasperated. The hedgehog nodded.
I know, but he's scared. Let me talk to him.
After a few moments of consideration, The sheriff nodded and took a few steps back. He began talking to Crazy Carl while Sonic kneeled by the fox once more.
Hey, you can look now.
He whispered. After a few moments, the pair's eyes met again. Sonic smiled.
Good. You don't have to be scared. We're here to help.
But how I couldn't get out?
The Younger softly asked. Sniffling, Sonic gestured to the two men.
They're friendly. They can get you out of that trap. Then we'll get your tail taken care of.
Miles paused. He'd expected the hedgehog to comment on his other tail, but either he hadn't noticed, which was unlikely, or he'd paid no mind to it. Oddly enough, the thought of the latter calmed him. He already felt like he could trust the hedgehog, even if the idea of those humans being his friends was crazy to him. He nodded, his body shaking again despite his best efforts at regaining control.
Just please, it hurts.
Sonic offered a smile.
I know, kid, I know.
Gosh, he felt old calling someone a kid. He'd learned from Tom that it was an affectionate term used for those younger than himself. He felt it was an appropriate situation to use it.
We'll be careful, and I know the perfect person to patch you up.
He reassured. Miles ignored that statement when the hedgehog beckoned the humans over to him. He braced himself to be so close to them but couldn't help the flinch as the younger man placed his hands on the trap.
All right, buddy.
The man soothed.
On the count of 3, I'll leave that thing open so you can get your tail out, okay?
After the fox nodded, he added,
It's probably gonna hurt, but you got raw sauce, okay?
The fox nodded again, albeit more reluctantly, but he seemed ready to comply.
Ready, okay. 1, 2, 3, out.
Tim used his strength to hold the jaws open, and Sonic picked the fox up to drag him away from the trap. Once the sheriff assessed that both were safe, he let the jaws snap shut again. He ran his hand through his hair with a sigh. Now, all he had to do was find Maddie so she could patch the fox up.
Hey, wait up.
Sonic's cries alerted him, and he wheeled around to its direction. He barely caught sight of the orange fur as it disappeared through the woods, with Sonic standing there. Tom rushed to Sonic's side.
What happened? Did you get Sonic?
I don't know. 1 second he was on the ground, and then he picked his tail up and ran. I gotta go after him.
The hedgehog exclaimed. He braced himself to run, but before he could take off, Tom stopped him.
Now wait just a second. Sonic, I know probably want answers, but he's really scared right now.
One look at the hedgehog and he could tell that Sonic was also scared, but he wisely didn't mention it.
And he's hurt and alone.
Sonic protested.
I understand what that's like. Okay. And yes, maybe I'm wondering what he wants. I know he comes from my world, and I know he was here for me. But if he tries anything, I know I can protect myself now. Okay.
He paused.
Besides, I don't think I'll have to. I'll be fine.
The sheriff sighed.
Fine, Maddie's shift is almost done, so I'll just tell her to bring supplies. We'll wait for you home.
Home? Sonic's heart etched at the thought of home. He didn't know what home really was for him, but he was intent on finding out through the fox, one way or another. Sonic nodded.
I'll go look for him. I think I know where he went.
With that said, he dashed towards the woods and also disappeared from sight. Tom stood there, utterly lost.
What did I just get myself into?